Welcome back to the North Hills office.
Part two,
Part one
pregnancy
was such a
podcast.
success, we had to come back and continue it. So, part one, if you haven't heard it yet, we focused on pre pregnancy. And we didn't get to do any of the men's side of pre pregnancy, so we will touch on that. But from what I understand, the goal today is to dig into pregnancy itself, nutrition and wellness during pregnancy.
I'm excited. This is going to be great. Well, Andrew, since we left off not getting the chance to talk about male fertility, how about we let you just rant for a second?
Just
What
dive on in.
what do the guys need to know?
With male fertility, it happens a lot at our office, right? A husband, wife come in and they're working on getting pregnant. There's so much pressure on the woman, and then it's like, well, what can the guy do? And the answer is a lot, to be perfectly honest. Just like what we explored in the pre-pregnancy discussions, things like stress absolutely play a role. In a guy, that reduces testosterone levels, that can raise things like sex hormone binding globulin and prolactin, and can affect sperm count pretty dramatically. Dehydration is a constant problem in our society. Most people, it's not that they really even eat too much salt, it's that they don't drink enough water most of the time. And when you have inadequate fluid, that means your muscles are dehydrated. That also means sperm production is going to be stifled. And then from there, it's adequate protein and adequate produce, right? Our fruits and vegetables are important for antioxidants, and maintain all sorts of cofactors and coenzymes, and can improve sperm motility and reduce the likelihood of sperm being faulty, if you will, for an easy description. And adequate protein does help the body keep metabolically active, keeps testosterone levels up, keeps the guy in his most peak form, which is what we want to see, right? We don't want just two people surviving, trying to procreate. We want two people thriving to the best of our ability. And for a guy, that's going to look like adequate sleep, it's going to look like adequate hydration, lots of protein, lots of produce. And if we can get those things, you'll be floored at what a sperm count will do, or again, what the likelihood of pregnancy, how much it can change.
Amazing, amazing. I like that. And since we have some experts here today, parents who have gone through it, and also dietitians who are super knowledgeable on this topic, I'm curious to know if you guys have anything to add to that topic of male fertility, anything that we're missing.
I think Andrew covered it pretty well. I will say. I'll add, generally being a healthy individual, managing your stress, having a good balanced intake, moving your body, sleeping adequately, all of those things are going to make you function as a healthier being, and thus your body would want to procreate and do the thing that it's naturally supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
I'd say that and figure it out now, because when baby does come, you already have these patterns established. So just to add to that too, setting yourself up for success before baby comes.
Totally. Yeah, you want to be in a space where you're ready to welcome that into the world and not it's like this huge big stressor. And another thing that I think we could maybe touch on and add is that anything that's generally good for women's fertility is typically also healthy for men's fertility. So all of the things that we talked about last episode, so if you haven't listened, go back and listen. It's also going to be really helpful for our men as well. So that was awesome. Male fertility. We feel like we covered it.
So I'm done here, right? Rest is all three of you.
You can leave.
Just
kidding. Just kidding. We want you here. So now let's talk about pregnancy. I am really interested in the basics because one of the things I love most about my job is that we get to find out that patients are pregnant oftentimes before all their friends and family, which is so great. But then they oftentimes have to wait like 8 weeks until their first OB appointment. And that can be really stressful. And so I love that we're often able to intervene earlier than that. But sometimes even when they go, the OB has to cover a lot of content. So nutrition, and it's not their area of expertise, right? So it's maybe something that gets skimmed over. Maybe some of the information is out of date just because, how long ago did they get that nutrition education? So this is where we really come into play. So I'm just so excited to talk to you both today about what are some of the basics outside of, just that little pamphlet that we get. What should we know about nutrition for pregnancy?
Well, basics, we're going to talk through, big ticket items. So the first thing is, are you getting in enough calories? Are you eating enough to sustain your body plus building a baby? Now, we'll go through common misconceptions later, but are you eating? Your body's going to do extra work, especially as that pregnancy continues. And I mean, age-old advice is, oh, it's about 300 extra calories. I mean, that's a grave estimate. It's more like eating 1.1. It's not eating for 2.
Yeah.
So, eat to your hunger and fullness and then maybe add an extra snack. But if you're not feeling very hungry, you don't need much extra anyway. I think a note when talking with pregnancy, and we cover this with non-pregnant clients as well, but a note is always saying, let's talk about the relationship with your food. A lot of females and males, but a lot of females have a pressure to restrict intake or have a damaged relationship with food at baseline because we live in a society of deprivation, right? We're constantly, oh, I shouldn't be having that, or oh, I can't control myself around that food. That's a telltale sign that you have a damaged food relationship, right? So all of a sudden you're pregnant, I'm eating for 2. That 9 a.m. cheesecake looks really good. But I'm so sorry to break it to you. Baby is not craving cheesecake at 9 a.m. That is you saying all of a sudden, I'm allowed to have all this food. It's okay. And a rebound effect of that is get it while you can. So really checking and making sure that you have a good, solid, foundational relationship with food at any stage in life is especially important in pregnancy to make sure that you are having a healthy, balanced eating filled pregnancy.
I love that. I think too, it's just, I'm pregnant, now what? And on the first podcast, we talked about getting your body to a safe place to be able to conceive. And now it's that stuff we talked about before, like filling your plate with protein and produce and managing your blood sugar. That stuff is all still the same and even more important because your body is safe enough to conceive. Now it has to stay safe to not only keep you sustained, but you're growing a human, another organ in the placenta. So like a lot's and throughout the pregnancy, the first, second, and third trimester, maybe we can break down a little bit, troubles and challenges and how like some nutrient needs differ. But essentially, as you increase through your pregnancy, nutrient needs sort of increase too, especially things like protein, which we talk about all the time here.
We love protein.
We love protein. Yeah.
I love that. I do think that breaking it down into trimester 1, 2, and 3 would be a really good thing to do. And then maybe what we'll do is we'll double back and kind of do some of the myth busting, because I think throughout the pregnancy, there's things that you're supposed to avoid, or, pitfalls and things you get worried about. Like it is a turbulent journey full of fear mongering and anxiety. And so hopefully we can kind of calm some of those anxieties. So when you think about trimester 1, I know for me as a practitioner, when I work with patients that are going into their pregnancy, the thing they're super worried about is we're talking about all this protein and all this produce, and then they feel super nauseous and want nothing to do with protein and produce. And they all of a sudden become massively fearful that they're just going to munch their way to a 95-pound pregnancy weight gain. And so what I'll note is I have some tips and tricks, but I definitely should be the last one bringing them up. So I would love to hear the tips and tricks of the crew. And also, if either of you want to draw from your personal experience for T1, trimester 1, what did you experience? Was there morning sickness? How did you circumvent it? And tips and tricks you'd give clients. So maybe the personal and the professional.
Yeah. I had a really easy pregnancy. I'm sorry. I know, I'm sorry. I will say, okay, first trimester, I was really good. I think the biggest symptom I was exhausted, sure. Nausea and morning sickness in general. For me, I started noticing very quickly if I was a smidgen dehydrated or a smidgen hungry, it got bad really quick. So I just didn't let that happen ever. Which, looked like making sure I was really hydrated, making sure I had my electrolyte drink, making sure I was eating more on that 2 to 3 hour time mark, added in an extra snack, and that really worked for me.
Yes.
And then just I was a little bit of a couch potato there for like 2 weeks, I would say. Just
Good.
tired.
Good. Yeah. Be a couch potato if you need to. I also had a really easy, fun pregnancy. So,
Uh-oh.
but I say that it's all about perspective because there are some complications and hardships in there. So, first trimester stuff, definitely experienced the morning sickness, which was a little bit more like afternoon sickness. Mine didn't really show up in the morning, and protein aversions, like food aversions, are kind of big. It might be something random that you've never eaten before. It might be something that you eat every day. I had savory protein aversions. So I love eggs, I love meat, and I just couldn't do it. So I had to figure out how to enjoy sweet-ish proteins because I wanted to do my best while also not stressing about it. So one of my tips is maybe expect that you're going to feel a little nauseous and averse, and maybe start ahead of time in the way of like a proactive mindset. Oh, I know I like eggs and meat and all these things. And what is going to happen if I can't eat those things? Then what am I going to fuel myself with? What could be a second option? So I think my tip that I tried to do myself and that I would give to other ladies is try to think ahead a little bit, have a plan in place. I also, if I was dehydrated, I did feel that sickness too. So staying ahead of that. And also I noticed if I would have like just crackers or something, or just fruit by itself, that just made it worse. Mm-hmm. So I went for like cashews or something with fat or protein in it. That seemed to keep me at bay a little bit.
You're helping me remember all of the things now.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
It did happen a year ago. I gave birth a year ago. My son is now 1, but I'm now remembering my first trimester a little bit more vividly after you said all of those things. I did have a lot of the blood sugar middle of the night snack. Keep something on your bedside table. If you are waking up and you don't feel that great, or you feel hungry, or I wake up in the middle of the night, I go back to bed, and in the morning I feel awful, it's most likely going to be blood sugar. Yep. I kept a banana on my bedside table, and my poor husband woke up somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m. every night to the snap of a banana and me in the pitch black munching on a banana pretty much every single night of my pregnancy. So snacks midnight, a bedtime snack, something like that could also be really helpful. There's also a couple supplements that you can do. Vitamin B6 is really helpful for morning sickness and nausea in general. Dosage wise, I mean, your doctor is going to know as well. I would always run by everything by the doctor when regarding supplementation, but 10 to 25 milligrams a couple times throughout the day can really, really help a lot of my clients. I've done that as well.
Yeah. Awesome.
Anything to add?
Oh, I want to say one quick thing.
Okay.
The B6, I found these chews. Ginger also is helpful too, like ginger tea or just chewing on ginger if that's your thing. But I found these chews that were like rice, ginger, B6. It helped. Yeah. It knocked it out. It didn't knock it out completely, but it was nice.
Yeah.
Sure didn't hurt anything.
One thing, I know we're going to get to myth busting later, but one thing I would love to myth bust is like ginger ale. Not all ginger ale has ginger in it, people. Is ginger helpful for that nausea? I would say yes, absolutely. But something like a ginger tea might be a better option because it has real ginger in it. What else was I going to say? But I think you guys really covered it. I think that's really great advice. And every pregnancy is so different, even from one pregnancy to the next in the same person. A lot of times I'll tell my clients that, hey, if you're experiencing some nausea during first trimester, it can actually be a good thing because it means that your hormones are shifting in the right way, right? So it's somewhat to be expected. And also there's so much that you can do with nutrition to manage that. And I think getting that one-on-one support is huge. So.
I just thought one more thing. Frequent urination comes into play a lot too. And sometimes when that happens, ladies are like, I can't afford to go to the bathroom that much. I can't drink that much. I work. What am I supposed to do? Don't stop drinking water. It's going to pass. But that happens too. Yeah. I don't know if you experienced that, but I think it's pretty common.
One thing I'll tell my clients with that, waking up multiple times, especially towards the end.
Just me?
Okay. I've got a tip. So especially towards the end of the pregnancy, we tend to have some swelling in the ankles, right? What I recommend to my clients that are getting up multiple times throughout the night is to elevate your feet an hour or two before bed, that can actually help you get some of that excess fluid out before bed. It might be able to save you one trip to the bathroom over the course of the night. I can't promise a night of full restful 8 hours without getting up, especially towards the end.
I'm going to store that in the back of my head.
I haven't tried it, but yeah, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think all of you hit it so well. With trimester 1, for me, when I think about, sort of from a zoom out, it's always the trimester of piles and morning sickness, and then there's the trimester of tests and feeling great, and then there's the trimester of fullness and get this thing out of me, is kind of like the progression I've watched happen, dozens and dozens of times. So in trimester 1, I usually recommend trying to figure out a number of piles of food, right? And what I'll note is even when your appetite doesn't, it will fluctuate, and then just fluctuate what's in the pile, don't fluctuate the number of piles. And what that can do is that can create some level of pattern or consistency. And I don't care if the pile is a half an English muffin one day and a full-on breakfast the next day. Like what's in the pile is less important than the pile being there. And it doesn't have to be timed to the minute, but I think having some rhythm can be very useful, because then what that sets you up to do is eat carbs and then be opportunistic when protein sounds appetizing, is usually what I tell people. Because without fail, if you keep consistent with the meals, you're going to have less acid. The carbs will help sponge it up and help kind of balance things. And at some point, your appetite will surge and you will crave protein. And I'm getting nods, so I'm not making this up. I promise. And so that's where the piles, pick your number of piles and then kind of try and stick to that, and then just let the piles fluctuate. And I think that also kind of gives people something to aim at in the short term, because I also remind them, this is the first 13 weeks. This isn't forever. This isn't how it's going to be the rest of your life. This is just the first 13 weeks. So let's go through this. Let's try and do the best we can to support the nausea. 100% what you two said. Hydration is the main reason why that happens. If you're dehydrated, you get absolutely blitzed. If there aren't little carbs in your piles, it definitely makes it way worse. But usually the carbs ideally start to be paired with something like you said, like it starts to stack. If we can do that, we'll work our way through, and then usually by week 14 or 15, it's a whole different conversation, and all of a sudden appetite seems to normalize. The only other thing I wanted to double back on was the exercise or activity side of things.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned feeling sluggish and fatigued, and I like to remind people that exercise is the caloric expense of taking muscles, which are cells, and putting them to work. And when we're sick, our immune cells get put to work and we burn extra calories. If you're having a really stressful day at work, your brain is working harder and burns more calories. This is the female reproductive system working, right? And so the caloric expense is there. No, it is not an eat for two scenario, but that whole dialogue internally of I'm lazy because I'm not willing to exercise, it's like you are literally creating life from nothing.
You're working around the clock.
I hate to tell you, your elliptical habit is so much less significant, and that's not discouraging exercise, but it's recognizing that your body, when it's fatigued, it's telling you to lay down because it has work to do. And so trust that is your reproductive system getting its workout in, if that's how you need to think about it. And then trust that you will also, just like you'll be opportunistic and you'll have hunger for protein, you will have energy bursts where you will want to go take a walk or you will want to go get sweaty. And so I encourage people to get out of the mindset of this forced daily routine and be a little bit more intuitive with the exercise and give your body the benefit of the doubt, especially in trimester 1, because that's when you are going to be your most fatigued, hormones shifting like crazy and all of that. So that's all I have.
Speaking of exercise, Laura, can you tell us about what you did during your pregnancy? I'm not as familiar with what you were up to, Erin, but I know Laura was.
We're both curious. We're just
yeah, what?
I did work at shout out SXP in shady side of Pittsburgh. Specifically Sam and all the trainers there. I love you all. But I was lifting quite a bit, very regularly, and doing a little bit of conditioning there. Now, prior to my pregnancy, I've had several back injuries, couple of herniated discs, strained my SI ligament. It was a whole mess, but super fun. Regardless, that really kept me exercising at a very consistent basis, because if I did not exercise, I felt worse and had more back pain. Now, throughout my pregnancy, my back was the best it's ever felt.
Wow.
All the way through third trimester. Actually, we were joking at the gym last time I was there. I was there the morning doing single leg RDLs the morning that I went into labor.
Oh,
so I worked out through the entire thing. In the beginning, you know, I'd go in the morning. It was a little easier. I'd be like, I'm not feeling so hot. But the consistency, I think, was really what mattered rather than the intensity. Mm-hmm. The more consistent you can be with an effort of staying active, the better you're going to feel, I would say, in health in general, but also through pregnancy.
Amazing. Wow. Not every woman has the privilege of being able to stay active throughout their pregnancy, but when they do, I found that a lot of my clients feel so much better. So, you know, if you have like a low-lying placenta, your doctor may be recommending bed rest and things like that. But if you can stay active, I would recommend doing so for sure.
Definitely.
What was your experience like with that, Erin?
Physical activity. Walking, hiking, low impact stuff. That's kind of my jam anyway. I don't really know what I'm doing with weights. I kind of just pick a machine and read the instructions. But I walked a lot. And I learned the process of, and the strategy too, of trying to walk after meals, like lunch and dinner. I tried to do that as much as I could, keeping my muscles active. And also it was a good mental thing for me too, just thinking through things. And especially in nature, that was kind of my release. So I walked a lot and I felt good. I never really had back issues or anything like that. But things did get uncomfortable, and we can get to that when we talk about the third trimester. But yeah. It's on my feet a lot.
And what were you doing for physical activity during pregnancy, Andrew?
I was training with Laura during hers.
He actually was. We saw each other all the time at the gym in the morning.
Can attest. We got after it together. She was getting super strong. It was awesome to watch.
Amazing.
I pick things up, I put them down.
Yeah.
You were all over their Instagram. You're like the best advertisement they had. I was like, whoa, beast.
Yep. Oh.
All right, so we talked a lot about the basics. I'm glad we talked on exercise as well. I'm also curious to know about like micronutrients. Are there certain micronutrients that we need more of, that we should be focusing more on? What about those micros? What do we think?
So yes, absolutely. I mean, if you were to come to me today, Devon, and say, hey, Laura, I'm pregnant.
I'm not.
Are you sure? I'm kidding. Okay, she's not pregnant. Andrew, I can't handle this.
Is this how I find out?
I can't handle this. So if you were to come and say, Laura, hey, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant all of a sudden, you know, the first things first is obviously we're dietitians. We're going to say food first, absolutely, supplements when needed. During pregnancy, your body's needs for micronutrients dramatically increase. And yes, your body knows what it's doing. Maybe it can absorb those things a little bit better. That's a lot on social media these days, which I have a lot of thoughts on. But think of a prenatal and the supplements we're recommending as an insurance policy. Take them as a nice little peace of mind to say, hey, at least I know I'm giving my body and baby the necessary building blocks to build a quality individual, right? You're going for quality when you're producing a baby, don't you think?
Yes.
Yes. So, you know, looking and saying we definitely want a prenatal supplement. Not all are created equal. Are we doing specific brands shout outs?
It's up to you.
Okay. I really like Thorne's Basic Prenatal. It is 3 capsules. And we'll talk about capsule fatigue in a sec, but it's only 3. Adding an extra omega that has more DHA, Nordic Natural Prenatal DHA is a wonderful one. Yep. Typically, iron is in prenatals. If it's not, it's an important one to have. And then an extra choline. Choline's getting a lot more, I would say, traction in the prenatal community. It's not any new micronutrient by any means, but it is something that's getting a lot more attention for supplementation in terms of making sure that you have a positive birth outcome. And the last one would be magnesium, specifically magnesium glycinate, especially if you are prone to calf cramps 3rd trimester like me.
Can I ask why glycinate?
Glycinate, so magnesium is attached to different compounds, being attached to glycinate actually increases your body's ability to absorb it, as opposed to something that's attached to maybe magnesium citrate, which doesn't get absorbed very well. And magnesium citrate is actually an osmotic laxative. So if you're dealing with constipation, that might be a nice little addition, but not the first line of defense.
Agreed. We're talking supplement shout outs. Yeah, prenatal. And again, some are 8 capsule servings like mine. Shout out to Seeking Health's Optimal Prenatal. Listen, I chose that one because it had other goodies in it. It had ginger, which is helpful for nausea prevention. It had inositol. It had milk thistle, which is a nice herb, and it had all the micros. It did not have iron in it, but if you are not averse to capsules, I highly recommend it. I also liked that Nordic Naturals prenatal too. In iron, what about an iron form? I think a lot of most women end up supplementing with iron, and some iron can be constipating, can cause nausea. And I found that iron bisglycinate was a good version that's easily absorbed and didn't cause too many GI issues. Yeah. Yes to the magnesium citrate powder that comes in handy, especially in the second trimester.
Do you know by chance, like if there's choline in that supplement? I've heard that one of the reasons some of these higher quality prenatals have so many capsules is because choline is so bulky.
Yes, it has choline and it has calcium and magnesium, which are bulky ones too. So yes.
Awesome. So could you talk a little bit about why you mentioned like choline is a big one, iron is a big nutrient to focus on. Why are these things so important?
Choline is especially important for neural development. I think that's what it's most famous for. Iron, you're building a lot of blood, and many other things too. So
yeah, blood volume goes dramatically up,
yes,
especially throughout pregnancy.
Yes.
Yeah. Any thoughts on choline? Like why that's important?
Definitely neural tube building. And you're also going to be able to get it through food. However, it's not in a ton of foods. Eggs, egg yolks specifically, are going to have choline. They're wonderful during pregnancy. And I think we might as well just tackle that myth of don't eat eggs during pregnancy now. An age-old, or I should say conventional nutrition recommendations during pregnancy is not to eat undercooked eggs, meaning soft yolks.
No dippy eggs.
No dippy eggs, you Pittsburghies. I never knew that until I moved here. It's wild. But it's also, you can find it in chicken, beef, milk, soy products. So it is in other foods, just much higher of a dose in eggs. And most people are not eating a recommended level of choline. Definitely, what else? Formation of the nervous system, I believe, as well.
Speaking of neural tube development, can we talk about folate and other, some of the B vitamins? And I've heard that there are certain forms of these vitamins and minerals that we should be taking. Could you explain a little bit about that? Should we be doing methylated? Should we be doing cyanocobalamin? I think Andrew wants to talk about this.
Apparently, I'm going to talk about this. And this, I mean, it's funny. It's kind of like the magnesium conversation, right? All of these compounds are different vitamins and minerals in the body that do different things. How we get them to you is something that we're always actively studying. And usually when they go into the body, they turn into something else, right? So they're usually activated or they initiate processes. And so they're considered, well, we call them vitamins and minerals. They're most often called cofactors or coenzymes in our processes in our body. And so a lot of research has been going into when you take one of these vitamins that you may consume from food, what does it actually become in the body? And so B12 is a common example. Thanks, Apollo. If there was a Snorks herd that was a Rottweiler taking a nap, he thinks I am really boring. So that's great. But so, for example, B12, gets activated into methylcobalamin. And so instead of us, providing a cyanocobalamin, which is a very abundant and easy to find B12, you can buy an active B12, which will be a methylcobalamin. And in that example, it skips having to use intrinsic factor in the stomach to activate it. And that can be really helpful if you're suffering from morning sickness, because who's to say your stomach is behaving properly and producing adequate intrinsic factor? Giant question mark. The same thing can be said for folic acid. Folic acid is really important for neural tube defects. It also goes through a methylation process, and so if we can get the methyl tetrahydrofolate, that's the one that, yeah, I didn't think I was going to get it. I stuck the landing. Olympics. So if we can get that once again is going to skip. You're basically taking the burden off your body and increasing the likelihood that it works. You'll note that the absorption goes up as well. And so when we watch different products like that, whether it's vitamin D2 versus vitamin D3 or methyl versus cyanocobalamins or the folic acid varieties, we can see a massive improvement in the body's ability to absorb, which also means that the body's going to have more of it. So that insurance policy has been bolstered, so to speak. And so good quality micronutrients is always a thing. They definitely will be a bit more expensive, but I'll also say that the prenatal game out there is absurd. If you're getting those like monthly packs that have trimester 1, trimester 2, trimester 3, and are $120 a month, you are getting robbed. Like, please, please, please come talk to us. Our appointment will be cheaper than that, and your supplements will be cheaper, and you'll have peace of mind. So like, don't get sold on marketing scams. And again, they do a great job. They point out what those things do in the body, right? And so, that doesn't mean that supplement does that. That means that nutrient does it. If you're deficient in it, taking that nutrient can be very helpful. And so not all supplements are necessary, and a lot of times they're kind of oversold beyond what we would really need. And so I think that's kind of where I'd leave that. I do want to make sure, as we're kind of digging into this, I want to make sure one thing I say is, for the most part, micronutrients can stay very much the same throughout pregnancy. Like, that's not something that has this massive, and that's kind of why I called out those like trimester 1, 2, and 3 prenatals.
Mm-hmm.
It's like nothing is changing that dramatically between those three in a micronutrient sense. I think you guys all covered the key micronutrients really well. Do we want to double back to trimester 2?
Sure.
So we've covered trimester 1. We've dug into some different supplement and nutrition considerations that kind of would go alongside starting trimester 1. I will say that in trimester 1, taking your supplements, were there any personal tips that worked for you two? I know a lot of people need to take it with like a lighter breakfast, like a carbohydrate situation.
So due to a medication that I have to take in the morning, I don't have a thyroid. It's okay. Taking Synthroid. Many people take it. It's cool. Only the cool kids do it. I have to separate my supplements greatly away from that just to make sure that the absorption is adequate for that. So I ended up taking the majority of my supplements with lunch, with dinner. Everything competes for absorption. If you have an iron stomach and you can take a prenatal on an empty stomach, God bless you, because that is good luck. Take it with food. Take it with plenty of water. If you take it with food, it's going to be okay. We're going to absorb enough nutrition throughout your pregnancy that you're going to make a quality baby. Everything's going to be okay. If you miss one day, it is okay. If you get super nauseous and it winds itself up in the toilet, that is also going to be okay. But my main tip would be food. Don't find out if you have an iron stomach or not. Just don't even test it, because you don't.
Thank you for saying all that. Agreed, 100%. Yes, with food, a major meal. Many individuals tend to be maybe stimulated sometimes by the B vitamins, and prenatals and things tend to be an increase in those. So I tried to avoid taking my prenatal after dinner time, just because it personally kept me up and I can't afford to lose any sleep. So I tried to keep my vitamins earlier in the day, and because there were 8 capsules, I did split them up between breakfast and lunch. And also I think sometimes with just capsule fatigue, and sometimes just actually getting the capsules down, if that's what form you're taking in, reach out to a dietitian. There's powders out there, there's liquid forms, there's gummies. Any little bit will help. Now's kind of not the time to split hairs. What you're doing is fine. Any little bit helps. Just make sure the bees are methylated.
So I know we talked about the micronutrients and things like that, but are there any specific foods that you highly recommend during pregnancy? I know that there's a lot of talk about liver out there. I know some people are taking liver capsules. I'm curious to know if you guys have thoughts on that.
So I did try the liver capsules because I do not enjoy liver. It was fine. I mean, I felt like increased energy, but it could be due to a lot of things. It was during also my second trimester, which energy was just higher anyway. So there's not a magic pregnancy food, single food, but I will say something that I really leaned into that I continue to do even in the dead of summer is soup. I did a lot of soups, particularly because whether it be the protein source be beans or lentils or chicken or whatever, you can pack so many veggies in there and some rice and the broth, and it's just kind of covers all the bases, and for lack of a better word, it's pre-digested a bit. So I felt that my body was able to assimilate those. So I didn't have a perfect like standalone food, but soup was a big staple. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, I also wanted to ask, like, why would someone take liver capsules?
Well, chicken liver or beef liver, rich in B vitamins, and also got a little bit of iron in there, choline. So it's a good food-based source. It's like a, I didn't make this up. Somebody called it nature's multivitamin. So it's just nutrient dense.
Yeah. Fantastic.
I would say my recommendation for specific foods would just be any nutrient dense food, which is going to be fruits, vegetables, quality protein sources, non-refined carbohydrates. The more nutritiously dense foods you have, the more micronutrients you're going to get, but more anti-inflammatories that you're going to get. Can also help decrease your risk of any complications during pregnancy, just because of, we know that inflammation is this thing in the body that can lead to a lot of preventable diseases, and just complications in pregnancy as well. Things that, don't necessarily build a healthy baby are the things that also don't build a healthy human in general. So, super refined foods, super processed foods, things that don't have a lot of nutritional value. Now, I'm not saying you can't have them in your diet at all, especially first trimester when you're maybe just snacking on goldfish and that's about it. It's completely fine to have a little intake of those, but if you were to take all of your food during that 9 months time span into a really, really big table and kind of organize it by fruits and vegetables and greens and beans and lentils, legumes and protein, and you got your fun foods in there, what takes up the majority of the space? Is it 40%, the more fun foods, 60%, or is it like 80%? We're looking for quality, 80-90% quality, 10-20% fun.
Yeah. Love that.
What do I want to ask about next? How about weight gain during pregnancy? Some of my clients are worried that they're not gaining enough weight. Some of them are worried that they're gaining way too much weight. Sometimes doctors will give specific recommendations, and if they're not following that to a T in terms of weight gain throughout the pregnancy, they're nervous. What would you say about that?
I gotta think about this.
Erin's thinking.
This is complex.
Weight gain, it's female sensitive subject. As long as baby's growing and they're happy with the rate of growth, I think your weight does not have to follow any sort of line. Some people gain more, some people gain less. I've had clients that have gained only 5 pounds during pregnancy, yet their body composition shifted greatly. Baby was very healthy.
Amazing.
So I think that it's less of a definite recommendation to say, hey, your BMI is between these points, you've got to gain X amount of weight. That makes zero sense. And there's not a lot of science, I would say actually none at all, but I'm 90% positive on this statement. There's like no scientific research that is backing up those ranges.
Thank you for kicking off the topic. It's always a complex one. And to that, I guess I would say, yes, as long as the baby's growing. And also, that is just one metric, weight. So as your weight is getting checked, what is your blood pressure doing? Eventually, you're going to have your blood sugar checked. Just keep monitoring those other metrics alongside weight, because if you fall, if you're falling outside of the range, but baby's growing, blood pressure's good, blood sugar's good, all those other things are within the box, I think you can rest a little bit and not put so much pressure on what the scale is saying. Also, too, if something does seem a little bit alarming, then that is a great time to work with a dietitian. Record your food, come in, see where you're at, so we can take a look and see if we can help piece together a gap, or see if we can help point you in a strategic direction. So that's what I would say.
I appreciate that. That was really good perspective. I hope that will make people feel a lot more at ease with this weight gain during pregnancy. We'll definitely come back to that during postpartum, because I know that there's that bounce back pressure. I know that people are maybe breastfeeding, hoping to lose weight. So anyways, we'll come back to that. Since we're kind of talking about trimester 2, that's sometimes when some complications might come up. It's certainly when some testing can start to happen, like for gestational diabetes, for example. We have that 2-hour oral glucose tolerance test that people love so much. Could you talk a little bit about maybe some common complications that might come up and what we can do about them from a nutritional standpoint?
Transfer the mic. I almost dropped it. Don't drop the baby. Shout out to my Swifties. Do you want to start?
Yeah, so gestational diabetes, the famous test, you drink the drink. I think that now that week is not the time to be practicing healthful meal patterns and food combining. As you said, patterns and consistency, starting even before conception, to work on blood sugar balancing, having proteins, plenty of produce, leading up to that point in your second trimester that you may or may not be worried about. Do I have that big red X on my back, gestational diabetes? What the heck am I going to do? I don't know. It tends to bring up sometimes a lot of stress and confusion too. And I think if your numbers are out of range, what would you say to that? I don't know. What's your experience with the general gestational diabetes population?
I think I want to rewind and go back a little bit to say, in terms of with gestational diabetes and just trending in that direction, it all comes from your insulin sensitivity or your insulin resistance at baseline. Yeah. So if you are going into a pregnancy and you're not pre-diabetic or anything like that, but you have underlying insulin resistance, you are going to be more likely to develop gestational diabetes. My recommendations are the same pretty much, right? Obviously geared towards the individual I'm working with, but you need to balance blood sugar. And I can't stress this enough. The way you eat is so much more important than what you eat most often. So if you are somebody who, and I'm kind of calling back to a statement I made in the last podcast, but if you're somebody that wakes up and has, I have a banana and nothing else, and I just have my coffee, and a couple hours later I've got some crackers, and a couple hours later, but you're just snacking on carbohydrates, and we're bouncing our blood sugar up and down all throughout the day, you are at a higher risk, yes, of just having gestational diabetes, but more so is just insulin resistance in general. The way we eat, balancing carbohydrates with things that are going to slow down the absorption of blood sugar is really important. Looking at adding protein to that meal, adding things with more fiber, adding healthy sources of fat, keeping the carbohydrates in those piles, moving throughout the day. The meal patterning is really important, but what's in the pattern, right? What are part of those meals or small snacky things? And pairing things together. Again, my clients will always hear me say, Where's the protein? Where's the fiber? Where's the fat? Where's the carb?
Mm-hmm.
And what types of foods are we having in those categories?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at balancing your food like that throughout your entire pregnancy is very important. And then, yes, heading into your glucose tolerance test, I mean, I would say day of, we're not really changing a whole lot. I would say don't eat right before. Don't go to, Starbucks and get a caramel frappuccino and
Right.
spike your blood sugar before you're about to ingest, 60 grams, 75 grams of carbohydrate
Mm-hmm.
into cells that are already been fed. I would say, all right, let's make sure that there's a lower carbohydrate meal right before you're able to go in, have those 75 grams. Your cells should be sensitive to it if you are a genuinely healthy individual.
Right.
You should not be testing through the roof at a gestational diabetes test.
Yeah.
However, there are outliers,
Always.
as always.
As always.
Yeah, that was great. I have a follow-up question, but I wanted to add something I will oftentimes recommend to my clients who are going in to take that oral glucose tolerance test. Sometimes there's this idea of if I eat super low carb in the week or so leading up to that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to have fantastic numbers and I can cheat the system. Unfortunately, sometimes that actually works to your disadvantage, right? If you've been eating super low carb, you're more likely to actually have a more dramatic glucose response. So it's actually maybe more likely that you'll get some unfavorable results. And what you really want is the real results, right? Let me say that pregnancy is a naturally insulin resistant state. It is. And so if we have that underlying insulin resistance, it is more likely that we're going to see that. I would say that gestational diabetes isn't random. That's something that you'll hear on the internet. There are certainly risk factors, some of which are within your control, some are genetic. And so if you find yourself diagnosed with gestational diabetes, certainly reach out and get some support immediately from a dietitian. And we're here to help you. You can still have a very healthy pregnancy. And then, to your point, the how is so important, right? Food pairings, making sure that we're not eating carbs on an empty stomach, no naked carbs, is really going to help us out. But anything you wanted to add, Erin?
No, agreed. And also, I was going to say, not funny enough, but the different proactive steps you're putting in place, dietary and lifestyle stuff, keeping your body active, those types of things that are within your control are also supportive to help prevent the other pregnancy complication, preeclampsia, too. Mm-hmm. Keeping a protein-rich diet, keeping yourself hydrated, plenty of electrolytes, some of those, back to some of the micronutrients that are super important, like calcium and potassium and magnesium. Mm-hmm. So it's not that now you have all these things. Now I have to avoid getting gestational diabetes. I also have to try to not get all these things that we're kind of talking about, kind of cross off all those boxes. So that's the only other thing I wanted to add too.
Yeah. Good. What else should we talk about? Any other complications that we haven't touched on, or you feel like we covered it? Preeclampsia. Preeclampsia is a big one. Do you want to talk about what are some nutrition recommendations for preeclampsia? Is there even anything we can do?
There are some things that you can do to lower your risk of getting it. But like you said, some are in your control, some aren't, right? Mm-hmm. One thing we do know is that adequate protein throughout your pregnancy can help. Going kind of to another big ticket item is just your macros in general, right? Are you eating enough protein grams throughout your day? Are you spacing them out appropriately? Going back to my piles of food. And same with fats and carbohydrates. But in terms of specifics for a protein is, I think it's become a hot topic these days is protein. Yeah. Yes, we absolutely need protein. We get it. It's essential for the human body. Every cell in your body requires it. There's also some conditionally essential amino acids, glycine, that your body just needs more of. So it's very important for you to consume it during a healthy pregnancy.
Where do we get glycine from?
It's a great question. Meat, chicken, collagen, bone broth.
Chicken.
Nailed it.
What am I forgetting? I'm drawing a blank here.
I don't know.
Chicken thigh.
That's not great.
Any animal.
Yeah.
Okay. Any animal products. Okay. I was going to say, oh my God, was that a trick question? Just throwing me for a loop.
Bone broth's a good.
Bone broth.
That checks off a lot of boxes.
Hydration, sodium.
Electrolytes,
you got it.
One of the things I'll call out there is, especially as I've listened to all the different foods that come out, you start to hear why things get marketed as superfoods, right? So bone broth is a good example. Is bone broth a very healthy thing? Yes.
Yeah.
Does your body know how to be pregnant and have a baby without it?
Yeah.
Yes. Right. I always like to say sea moss is just Japanese kale, right? Like it's just the green thing from another side of the world. Like, yes, as a society, we figured out lots of green things.
But it's sea moss.
But it's sea moss. It's got to be better, right? No. And it's, but I did want to call that out because a lot of the superfoods that are out there, it's not to poo-poo them as bad, but it's to remind you that they're not essential. They're just, they're energy, they're nutrient dense. They have a lot of micronutrients, so they can have a lot of value. But I also want to make sure people realize if you don't include them, you're not a bad mom to be. You're not failing at your health. Like there tends to be this when we give foods an A plus, we sometimes give the consumer an F unnecessarily. And I think that I just wanted, as I've heard it, there's been a couple foods that it's like, hey, yeah, they can be really great. And if you have access to them and they can get circulated in the diet, and most things, by the way, don't need to exist daily. Yeah. Right. So like, can you integrate it into your diet weekly or every couple weeks or every couple days, maybe? So food is definitely meant to be a rotation scenario.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because that just goes back to kind of what we were saying, even in the first session, is like, there's no magic fertility food. There's no magic pregnancy food. It's, yeah.
There's good food.
Yeah.
And we can balance it.
Variety.
Yeah. Pacing it works really nicely.
Yes.
Right? Spreading it across the day is important, as we talked about.
Yeah.
It's fun. In trimester 1, right, when I talked about how, oh yeah, I'll take that. In trimester 1, when I talked about how I like to have people just focus on their piles, it's because in trimester 2, those piles tend to mature. And that's something that you alluded to, Laura, is like in trimester 1, those piles might be a handful of goldfish. But by trimester 2, they're usually like actual meals. And what happens is that rhythm has been established. And that's what I always want to emphasize is week 27 oral glucose tolerance test, as you have all said, that's not when you start studying for that test. That is something you've been preparing for minimum 27 weeks, but ideally during the prenatal phase when you were trying to establish good patterns for fertility. It should be an outcome, right? So a lot of times that test is an output, not an input, which is to say if you've been eating in good piles, had good patterning, rotating good proteins, doing all the things we've discussed, you are going to minimize the risk of an environmental gestational diabetes. That does not rule out a genetic. It can help play tug of war against a genetic. And so a way to say it is if we had every woman do this, we would watch gestational diabetes rates plummet, but they wouldn't go to zero. They would still exist. There are still women out there that are going to do everything right, quote unquote, and their body is still going to develop an insulin resistance that then spills over. What I'll note is if they aren't doing these habits, it's going to be even worse. And so maybe this is the difference between 5 units of insulin and 50. It always matters. There's not a person on that spectrum that this doesn't matter. Your patterns, your piles, your protein, your produce, those things will set you free regardless of where on that spectrum that is.
Do your P's.
Do your P's.
Speaking of P's, potassium, preeclampsia prevention. Making sure that your electrolytes.
That was epic.
Nice transition.
We totally practiced that.
It's definitely, looking at making sure that your minerals and the electrolytes are on point is very important. Sodium, and I'm going to go back to blood pressure for a minute. Go back to blood sugar for a minute and talk about blood pressure as well. So if we're talking about blood sugar, blood pressure issues kind of go hand in hand. So if we're not crushing our P's, we're not doing piles, we're not getting protein, we're not managing our blood glucose spikes, as a side effect, a lot of time blood pressure can get out of control. Blood pressure getting out of control, preeclampsia is not super far down, potentially. So really looking at magnesium, calcium, potassium, sodium, and making sure that we are getting all of those in our diet throughout pregnancy can be really vital. Obviously, sodium, we know where to get that, right? Potassium, we're looking at potatoes, bananas, avocados. I'm trying to.
Oranges are great.
Tomatoes.
Yeah, dairy products. Most of your
Calcium,
greens.
again, dark leafy greens. We're going to go with some dairy as well. Same with magnesium.
Fish bones and
Ooh.
Fish bones.
fish with bones like salmon.
Salmon.
Yeah, the canned salmon with bones. If you're into it.
If you're into it,
Go for it. I know we talked about some foods that could be helpful for pregnancy and some nutrients that could be helpful for pregnancy. But there's also this long list of foods that we're told that we're not supposed to have. I'm curious to know what you guys think of some of these foods. Are there any foods that you would say, yeah, for sure don't have this during pregnancy? Or maybe there's a gray line. I don't know. What do you think?
I think the for sure just don't even do it is raw shellfish. It sort of brings me to the point that I think there's different opinions out there about raw fish in general, like sushi. I think raw shellfish, just from a food safety point, would be like, no.
Why bother?
Yeah, right. Why
Not
bother?
worth it.
A lot of it, that's what it really is, right? It's a risk of foodborne illness. It's a risk of foodborne illness, and so you always have to ask, like, how risky is this? Like, where are you sourcing it from, essentially? And with shellfish, I mean, we live in Pittsburgh.
It's a far way away
So,
from
like,
the ocean.
That's
the ocean near us.
that's at least a truck, a plane, and a truck.
You,
And that's
you
all I'm
telling
saying.
me
Best
there's
case.
no oysters in the Monongahela?
If they are, I'm not eating them.
You should
I mean,
eat.
Yeah, exactly. And so it is to say, like, you got to be smart about your sourcing.
Any other foods? Any other foods we shouldn't be eating?
I mean, I'll go back to the sushi and just risk assessment, because a lot of the conventional nutrition education on the don'ts list are geared at mitigating your risk of foodborne illness. I'll be honest, I had sushi pregnant.
Whoa!
What? Blah, blah, blah.
Breaking news.
Going back, I mean, first trimester, food aversions. Ooh, cooked salmon, absolutely not. No, thank you. Could not be in the house while my husband cooked it. It was awful. Raw salmon, I could not stop thinking about. And they say your body does crave kind of what it needs. Now, let's go back to you're not craving cheesecake. I know. You're not craving the cheesecake because you need it. But a raw salmon was something that my body clearly wanted for some reason. Mitigating the risks that you can, while if you choose to put yourself at that risk, you have to do it in a smart manner. Salmon sashimi, especially from a reputable, keyword reputable, restaurant that has flash frozen their fish, is going to be less of a risk than getting a salad from a restaurant.
Right.
So going to a reputable place, getting freshly sliced sashimi, you're negating a lot of the risks. It's such a beneficial food, especially in terms of a protein source, DHA and other some of those minerals that we were discussing before. And I mean, I was craving it, so sorry.
So you're saying no gas station sushi and just proceed with caution.
Exactly.
Do you? I came across this. I thought it was so interesting. You look at Asian cultures, Japanese cultures. That's part of their dietary staple is raw fish,
And that doesn't change during pregnancy.
Right. And I came across something interesting that yes, there's also the, should I be avoiding fish because of lead? Or mercury? Oh my goodness. What are fish that are higher in mercury than others? How do I manage that? The interesting thing I learned is that the eating fish raw with, selenium and those other sort of antioxidants in them, that helps if there is mercury. Those other antioxidants essentially help bind to the mineral so that you're not necessarily absorbing it. So the article was going on to say that eating raw fish as opposed to cooked can be a bit protective. I thought that was have you ever heard that or came across that?
Yes, that is factually accurate.
Well, good. Maybe. I also ate sushi. So
Hell yeah.
confessions.
You heard it here first.
You call him Sushan.
Yeah.
So let's think while we're on this, we talked about raw fish. And again, most of that is really the foodborne illness conversation, right? Getting so sick that your body gets so overwhelmed and God forbid has some sort of spontaneous abortion reaction to it, right? Not ideal. Trying to protect that downside. That's not bad advice, but it's also not meant to be fear mongered. And I think that's where, when I look at our, like, particularly like now that millennials are like having kids and they've just like gotten A pluses and white knuckled everything, they seem to take this way too seriously. And so what I'd notice, if you are going to follow the rule, I want you to at least understand why the rule is the rule. It's not because it's toxic for your baby. And so, like, if you have a fitfluencer that told you that seafood is toxic to your baby, like, please run. It's a foodborne illness risk. A lot of the other foods that are out there that are sort of warned against, it can be the same thing, right? So, for example, the big one is like deli meats. And there's two components there. One, deli meats have a tendency to be cured and sat out, and they also then can be a little bit temperature resistant, which can increase the risk that they do have foodborne illness. They can also contain ridiculously high amounts of nitrates, which can cause a slight uptick in blood pressure if you're someone who's already hypertensive or prone to preeclampsia. And so that's an example of a food where, like, I understand why the general rule of thumb is there, but this is not a rigid rule that's meant to make you fear for you and your baby's life. Most things are going to be fine if you're being smart about it, right? I wouldn't have you go to GetGo and pick the capicola sandwich that's dated for today. Probably, yeah, probably not. Yeah, exactly. So probably no like gas station pastrami. But it's to
Sorry,
say,
gas stations. We're really picking on you.
We apologize.
Yeah. This podcast was brought to you by not gas stations. But it's most of the foods that are out there. So I think deli meats. What are some of the other ones that pop in the head?
You don't hear somebody saying, don't eat fresh fruits and vegetables because of their foodborne illness.
But you're not supposed to eat salad bars at restaurants because of the listeria. Foodborne illness again.
Maybe buffets. I don't know. I would just say, your 4th of July pasta salad that's been sitting out for 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
Maybe not worth it.
Maybe do that one all the time.
Not just pregnant.
I was just say that's one I would follow.
That's fair.
Not trying to get pregnant personally right now, and I wouldn't eat that either. So
Caffeine and alcohol. I want to hear what you have to say.
Caffeine is definitely a hot topic. A lot of my clients, especially, are saying, "Please don't take away my coffee." You're okay to have a glass. You're okay to have cold brew quite a bit. You're okay to have a cup of coffee.
I agree. I'm so excited.
Andrew's going to be chomping at the bit to talk about this one too, I'm sure. But you and your caffeine, man.
Yep.
But it's definitely something that we want to be weary of. Is why are we relying on caffeine for energy? Now, don't get me wrong. I am a coffee gal. I have a coffee. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning. I love my espresso. But having it in terms of being in a smart manner, obviously we don't need to be slugging down Red Bulls all day long. If you are that exhausted, we have other things to talk about.
Mm-hmm. My Diet Coke Girlies, it has caffeine in it, so think about that.
55 milligrams per
55 milligrams per can.
So, do you guys know that I was the intern for the National Coffee Association in college?
No.
What?
We have some conflicts of interest here.
Oh my gosh.
That's cool.
Well, what's cool though is after reviewing hundreds of studies in pregnant women, believe it or not, anything under 200 milligrams is not only considered safe, but it's actually been shown to have immense benefit. And so when you look at the micronutrients and all the antioxidants and all the botanicals that are in coffee, those things are all very good. And a little bit of caffeine can actually be very good for blood flow and circulation and delivery of nutrients. It can do a lot of things. We don't need to dig into the list too hard, but it is to say that tolerable upper limit for normal adults, non-pregnant, is considered 400. Beyond that, you're saturating receptors and negatively affecting your physiology. We just cut it in half when you're pregnant. And so, and the average cup of coffee is going to be 80 to 110 milligrams, depending on light roast, dark roast, where it was sourced, what time of year, all the things. So it's good to just like guess around 100 a cup. And so you would do 2 cups, which is kind of a good thing to think about. I would also just note that I think you should always drink coffee after you've been hydrated. And so if you shouldn't really start your day as coffee the first thing, right? Ideally, drink some water first and then have a coffee. That can make a big impact on blood pressure and some of the other things that you might be concerned with in terms of the caffeine.
And alcohol. What do we think about alcohol?
Yes. No kidding. Hot take. No. Alcohol, we know a high intake of alcohol in pregnancy is correlated with poor outcomes for the fetal development. So it's something that we really don't want to be having very often, especially early in pregnancy.
Also, I know we're in America, other cultures do things differently. And I think Lily Nichols actually, we'll bring her up later in our resources if we review them again. But she said something interesting in her Real Food for Pregnancy book, is that no matter what you kind of think about alcohol, no matter where you are on the spectrum, is it safe? Do I do it in moderation? I'm going to avoid it entirely. It does take nutrients from, it does kind of, it's an anti-nutrient. It robs your body of the nutrients that you are taking in. So if this is a time where we're trying to give as much as possible to yourself and the baby, is it doing the situation any favors? So that can be a helpful kind of lens to look through it.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
You gonna say something?
I was just making sure our mics were mics were checked in. This one still works. That one is dead. And so we might actually have to slow this bad boy down and wind ourselves into a part 3 for post preg.
I like it. I think we covered a lot of content today. Thank you guys so much for all of your knowledge. It's so helpful to hear your perspective. I hope it's really reassuring to a lot of our audience here, a lot of which either are parents or are going to become parents. So if you're one of those people, or if you know someone or love someone who is going to become pregnant at some point, hopefully send this to them so that they can just have a little bit less stress and just be going through it with a little more confidence. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this up? No?
It's going to be all right.
It's going to be all right. It's going to be great.
You're going to be okay.
You're going to be great.
I'll just close by saying that, of course, this is always for educational purposes only. This does not substitute medical advice. Always run everything by your doctor. And this is just a great plug for if you want some more specific one-on-one medical advice, you can come see a dietitian. So you can give us a call, visit our website, casespecificnutrition.com.
Yeah. Thank you always. Stay tuned for part 3. We will do post preg, and we'll talk about all the hot topics, including but not limited to, how do I get the baby weight off? Massive eye rolls. We're going to have a really good time with that one. I can't wait to be super, super triggering. It's going to be really fun. Stay tuned, everybody.